When it comes to beautiful game environments, it really is hard to top the Breath of the Wild. And luckily for us, in this video, our good friend Anna was kind enough to share a breakdown with us, explaining exactly how she created her Breath of the Wild inspired environment. There's going to be a ton of interesting stuff in this one. Now, if you're really serious about learning environment creation like this, you can check out my environment art course, where I'm going to teach you how to create beautiful trees, flowing grass, and sweeping landscapes, like the one you see on your screen now, in exciting, simple, and engaging lessons. Anna also gets a cut of sales if you use the link in the description, so make sure to use that one. Okay, that's enough of my sales pitch. Let's get into this week's video. Enjoy.
Hi Stylized Station, my name is Ana Figueiredo. I'm a 3D prop and environment artist from Brazil, and today I'm here to break down one of my latest environments, a Zelda Breath of the Wild inspired scene made inside of Unreal Engine 5. I'm going to separate this video in 3 parts. First of all, composition, in which I'll talk about my inspirations for the scene and also give you some composition tips. After that, we are going to talk about assets and texturing, in which I'll go over how I textured and used my trim sheet, as well as my texturing process for the main shrine in this scene. And lastly, we are going to jump inside of Unreal Engine 5, in which I'll do a big breakdown of the scene, starting off talking about lighting. I'll go in depth about how I created my shader, and I'll also showcase how that shader works. So let's jump right into it. I want to talk about first where the idea of the scene came from. I saw this concept here by Andy Clark as a redesign of a Zelda Breath of the Wild shrine. From this concept, I started thinking about what type of environment would this shrine be in. I got some reference from, of course, Zelda Breath of the Wild and Genshin Impact, and most importantly, I looked up some mood inspirations. I wanted to go for something that felt abandoned, but also really peaceful. For this piece, I knew since earlier on that I just wanted to have a few pieces in the scene, and I wanted the main focus to be on the shrine. So I started thinking about how could I better lead the viewer's eyes toward the shrine, and also how could I frame the scene. While I was thinking about my composition, I did receive some really valuable feedback from Zolt Jackley. I'm really thankful for that, and I'm sorry I probably butchered his name. The way that I have the scene set it up is that everything is pointing towards my shrine. And also, the vegetation placed on the borders of the scene were put there to frame the scene better. So when the viewer's eyes goes to the border of the scene, the vegetation will help to lead their eyes back to my scene. I don't really have a lot of assets going on for this scene. I basically have my foliage, those architectural pieces, that is basically just a pillar that I've broken up into pieces, and some arches, pretty low poly, pretty simple to model. And of course, my shrine, which is the only unique piece in this environment. For my pillars and the ruin pieces, I worked on them just by doing one single trim sheet. So for the trim sheet, if you have never used it before, it's basically one single texture that you'll be placing your UV shells on top. So that will save you a lot of time, because you will now have to do unique textures for each one of your models. That would take a really long time, and it would not really be efficient when it comes to the memory cost. For the trim sheet, my process was just creating a simple base inside of Maya, in which I divided up the sections that I wanted it to have and also placed around the bricks. After that, I just exported the high poly out of ZBrush, and I baked it inside of a plane in Substance Painter. My process for texturing the trim sheet was honestly pretty simple. I used something called So Much Materials. I am not sure if it qualifies as a plugin. You guys can look it up. It basically will give you a good starting point for your texturing. You'll be able to select different colors, to have on your material. You can play around with the gradient, specular, and so it goes. I like to use this to give me a good base to work out on my textures. So I just have this one for the lighter parts and this one for the darker ones. And after that, I just created some highlights. You can see in here. For my highlights, I created them individually per se for each part of my trim sheet. It's just a base color. And then I created a mask for it with a curvature generator, and I masked out the other parts so I can, again, just do the highlights for the sections individually. For my shrine, since it wasn't any material in particular, I just allowed myself to have fun and play around with the textures. One thing that I want to point out really quick, this was not my final texture. It seems like my latest file for this got corrupted somehow, so you might notice that the eye on the center is still all blue. Overall, the material that I used on the shrine itself did not change much. It was just some of the details on those areas and on the eyes, so I do apologize for that. I separated this out in 3 parts, one for the emissive, and then I separated this in 2 parts. I just tried to cut it up into 4 pieces and do it in a symmetric way. This can result in some problems, like a little bit of a butterfly effect. Since my camera was going to be far away from it, I just figured that it wouldn't really be noticeable from a distance, so I went for that just to save up on a little bit of memory. It's basically the same material all throughout. In this area, those lighter ones and the yellowish ones on the top, just the same material that I change the colors of. I will break up this material. I started this material with just a so much diffuse that I mentioned before on the trim sheets. I don't really think the so much diffuse did much for me in this case, just because it was unique, and the baking that I didn't have a lot of details on it. I just baked the low poly as a high poly, so it did not give me a lot of details in there. So I had to do most of the details for the shrine on the texturing process. Then I added this material called Leather Stylized. I do not remember if this material comes by default in Substance Painter or if I got it out of Substance Share, but that just added some noise around here. But I was basically treating this material as if it was my big quotation marks base color. For this one, I've added a gradient on the bottom. So this was just a fill with the position map and a distance generator. I just play around with those lights until I got the fading going on from the bottom up. For this layer edges, what it does is that it will add some darker parts on the inside. So that will kind of create the effect that the edges are lighter. I did decide to go a little bit rougher on this one because I wanted those edges to make it look like it was out in the rain for a long time. I could probably play around with the levels and soften it up a little bit more. Just a mask editor that I play around with the balance in and some of the contrast. Just added a sharpen in there, and I used the levels to invert it. After that, I just added some color variation. It's just a light generator that I played around with, and this is just to add a little bit more of a different color in there. So I have yellow and pink going on. For the color variations, I didn't want it to be anything too jarring, so it's a pretty a slight touch in there. And then after that, I just have some more ambient occlusion just to make it pop a little bit more, and a baked lighting that is just a filter. After that, I went back in there and started refining some of the edges. So now I have some more yellow going on in there, and I added some more texture definition. And I just noticed that I never turned my levels back in there. There we go. That's better. For this texture definition, it's just a grunge. I picked the leak because, again, I wanted to make it look like it was there in the rain for a while. and I just play around with the levels. And after that, I just put a dirt in there. Very slight difference, not a lot. And for this part right here, it's just a roughness change, because up to this point it was looking pretty rough. So I decided to add some areas that looked a little bit wet. And the reason why I did this was just because that's how it looks like in the Breath of the Wild original shrine. Again, I didn't base my material that much out of it, but I still wanted to stay at least a little bit consistent to what we saw inside of the game. Alright, so now we can jump inside of Unreal Engine. To start off, I would like to talk a little bit about the light that I have going on in the scene. So first of all, I'll turn everything off and we go each one of them separately. Alright, so to start, I have my skylight. With my skylight, I have an HDRI in there that is kind of a golden hour. I picked an HDRI that had a little bit of purple going on in there. The skylight will be filling some of the shadows with a purple tint. So I think you can see it especially well around the street once I turn that on. There will be a little purple tint going on in there. My skylight is not that intense. I just left it on 1. My main light is truly just the sunlight, the direct light. So the skylight is there more to soften the shadows and make everything look more natural. For my main light, I chose to go on it by using temperature. The intensity, it's not too high at all. It seems a little bit too bright at the moment because I don't have my fog turned on. I went for it using the temperature like I mentioned, so I have it pulled up right now. I recommend that when you're using directional lights inside of Unreal Engine that you try to use temperature, because overall it will just give you some more natural results. The lower the number is, the warmer the light will be, and the higher it will be more bluish and colder. So my light is at 3200. If I change it to, let's say, a 5K, like I mentioned, this will make it colder. And if I do it like 2000, it will make it even warmer. I think that 3000 is around good enough for my scene, so it's not extremely vibrant, but it still have a good warmth to it. So right here, I have my explanation of height fog. And the way that I went about my fog, I didn't want it to be too dense, but I basically focused the fog more in the very background. And that helped me to have that effect that the foreground is darker, the middle ground's kind of in between, and the background is lighter with the fog. Looking at it now, I do think I could have separated a little bit more and have the background and the middle ground a little bit more separated and a little bit more defined. Another thing that I did on the lights, and you guys can see right here, is that I placed 3 spotlights. This one right here is to soften the shadows on the front, because by default I think they were a little bit too dark and I couldn't really see the details on this foliage. The second light, I don't remember what I had in this. And then on my third light, it's basically to brighten up my shrine right here and bring a little bit more of attention to it. Besides that, another thing that I did with my lights is that I placed some trees around. So let me turn on and off the game mode. Those trees are there mostly to shape the shadows a little bit more. So as I move it, you guys can see that this tree is by making this top a little bit darker. So inside of Unreal Engine, if you want to do something similar, you just need to select the object that you want to cast the shadow. And after that, go on details and just type hidden and just turn on hidden shadow and actor hidden in game. And once you get in game mode, which in Unreal you can activate by clicking on G, the actors will disappear, but we are still going to have the shadow. Now I'll talk a little bit more about the shader that I have used on this piece. This shader is a little bit complex and I'll try to explain it to the best of my ability. However, before I get to that, a little bit of a disclaimer. I made this shader based out of a tutorial by Ken Yadalioglu. I believe that's how you say his name. He's probably the second person whose name I butchered on this video, but all credits to him for the shader. I did tweak the shader a little bit based on what I needed. I will be zooming in on each one of the sections in case you want to have a better look at it. But basically, the way that this works is that I have all of this in a material function, and all of those are small little function inputs. And after that, I just have a make material attributes right there. And then I have a second function. And this is the point that I basically do a function call to the MF material. And I connect all of the parameters in there. From this one is the part that I start adding some big quotation marks secondary functions. So for my environment, I do have runtime virtual texture. I will show it a little bit more here in a bit. I also have a Z up that will add some materials based to which face of the asset is looking up. I'll show it a little bit more here in a bit as well. And I also have an edgeware function right here. On the first material function, I have two different tilings, one for the regular textures per se, and one for some details that I especially have on my normals. For my base color, I have a lot of tints and masks going on in there. That is pretty useful once you are playing around with it on the material instances. And then I just put a switch in case I don't want to use the base color map. This value is then being lerped with some masks right here. And then once again, I have a switch in case I don't really want to use the masks. For my normals, I play around a little bit with the flatten. I'll be honest, I didn't really use the flatten normals on my material instances, but I'll leave it here in case any of you guys want to do something similar to this. After that, I have my roughness, so of course I can use the roughness map and control a little bit on how rough it is going to be. So it will let me clamp those values together, and this is also pretty useful. Or in case I don't have a roughness map, I can just input a value, and I have that on a switch as well. Metallic is pretty basic, it's pretty much a yes or no. This emissive, it's one of the tweaks that I did, since for my shrine I needed to have an emissive in there, and it's basically just controlling how strong the emissive light is going to be. And I also added pixel depth in there. With those, I also have some sections. So right in here, for example, I have my base color, and then I have the sorting. So all of my base color nodes are on the N100s, and that makes my life easier once we go to the second function, the material parameters. So right in here, I have it all separated by the base color, the normal, the roughness, and at this point, it's just connecting the parameters in place. So this part's pretty simple. And then I get the results of this function and plug that onto a get material. On this part right here is just the RVT. And then on this area we have the Z up. I'll go ahead and pull up the Z up and the Z up blend functions again in case anyone wants to do something similar. Let me put it closer. And this is the Z up blend. And after that, another get material, and then I have the edgeware. Oh, and all of those have switches in them. And this one right here is the edgeware function. So up to this point, those are still all material functions. So my final material per se, just a regular material in which I have the material parameter function connected to this node. This is pretty useful. So for example, in this material, I don't have a lot going on, but on another project that I was working on, I actually needed to have some vertex painting. So it's on this stage that I added the vertex paint in there. So right here, I have my material parameters, and it's all connecting back to the MM material. And also on my foliage, so let me go back here. On my foliage, since on my regular material parameters, I didn't need things like opacity. It's on this stage that I added the opacity, the subsurface, and the world displacement. All of those on a set material to have my final master material for the foliage here. This is how the material looks like on the instance, so I have it separated. For some reason, I have some misspelling here and there, like on the base color and on the edgeware, but it's fine. To start off, I can add some tint in here. For the Z-up, it's basically going to take a look at the faces that are looking up on the model. This is really useful to add moss, for example. So I do believe I have some moss in here. Right here. I do believe that I have the Z-up going on this texture. I'll have to take a look. The edgeware, I really like going to analyze the edges that I have going on this mesh. So let me turn off my Z-up here. So let me change this to a color that is easier to see. Okay. And I can play around with how this is looking. So I can, for example, bump this up. And if I lower it, it will be easier to see. So 0.2, so now it's defining the edges a little bit more. I can also change the tiling of that mask, just if I want to vary the results a little bit more. And you can also change how strong it is. So if I change it like a 10. This is really useful to add some highlights and to add some dirt in there as well. And then I have my emissive, and like I mentioned, I can control how bright it is. Since this is inside of Unreal 5, the emissive map is actually working pretty well with Lumen. And I also have my RVT and the pixel depth in there. I want to go ahead and talk a little bit more about the RVT. It basically changes the way that some assets blend in with the landscape. So it's more noticeable on this piece that I have right here. I'll go ahead and just duplicate it. The texture in quotation marks on this piece will change depending on where it's touching. So if I lift it up and make it touch the grass, this way, it's going to start having some of the green in there. So it's very nice to get some nicer blending going on. So I have those pretty high. I just play around until I got something that I liked mostly. And that will be it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you learned something from it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on my ArtStation. Thank you so much for watching.